I'm Laura Bonnell, and this is the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast coming to you from Detroit. Please subscribe and even rate and comment on our podcasts when it moves you. I learn something new with every podcast, and I'm always inspired by the people that are showcased here. We don't give medical advice. You need to connect with your doctor for that. I hope that this Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast educates you and sparks some volunteering or advocacy. The CF community needs people like you. Thanks to our sponsors, Viatris and Vertex, for their support. A 70-year-old person with cystic fibrosis, it has a beautiful ring to it and something that until recently we didn't hear a lot about. As a matter of fact, life expectancy currently is at 56 years old, and 56 still has so many variables, even with a life expectancy today. Luanne has a Master of Fine Art in Painting and a PhD in art history. She also had a private art dealership in New York City. Her specialty was in European and American masterworks, and Luanne served as the Bruce A. Beal Distinguished Director at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum at Rollins College and director of the University of New Mexico Art Museum. Her expertise has yielded several publications in the field, and she has mounted over 35 exhibitions. She was a fellow at the Getty Research Institute. This podcast is about Luanne and not about her equally famous husband, Danielle Reeve, but we will mention him later in this podcast. And with all she has going on in her personal life, she still makes time to talk about CF and has served on the CF committees in the past, serving as a co-chair for the Patient and Family Advisory Committee at Stanford Medical Center in California. She's raised awareness about pre- and post-transplant patients. Luanne and her husband live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the Dordogne region in southwest France. So I'm excited for you to get to know her. Luanne, thank you so much. It's great to see you and meet you for the first time. I've heard so much about you, so many wonderful things, and I'm also delighted to hear that you're going to be 70, which is incredible. You were diagnosed in 1969 at the age of 13, and I don't even know what the life expectancy was then, but it probably wasn't much. And you had a double lung transplant in 2011, 14 years ago. So he's 70 coming up. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me today. This is an honor to speak with you because I know you're on the front lines of doing such important outreach for our community. So this is an honor to join you today.
You're welcome. I'm delighted to have you. And I have to say you're an inspiration to all of us, because to think of my daughters at your age, I could stand up and dance, honestly. You know
yes.
how powerful that is, right?
I don't, because I live it, but I do. When I have spoken, I have had such an outpouring of love and congratulations and appreciation from mothers, especially, you know. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that I stand as a witness to the possible, you know, what is possible. And just to go back a little bit chronologically to the beginning, yes, it was 69 and it was Dallas, and I was one of those kids that had always been, whose health had always been misunderstood. I can't say that I was misdiagnosed because there was no diagnosis. And we have to remember that it was really not that many years before that CF was claimed by Dorothy Anderson to be a distinct disease. It had been recorded in babies. It was understood under the umbrella of celiac, and she parsed it out over 3 years of intensive research there in the basement at Babies Hospital at Columbia in New York City, and came up with solid research that definitively confirmed that those of us given this thing through genetic transmission were a unique population. And for the first time, this was identified, not understood, but identified. So in 69, when I fell very, very ill and was rushed to the ER in Dallas. They went through a series of tests over, a very long period of time. They suspected I might have pulmonary, lung cancer. So the whole thing was all over the map. And finally, they gave me the old, chloride sweat test, the salt test, and that came up positive. And the words sounding Latinate, cystic fibrosis, were confounding. I was not told the diagnosis. My parents were. There was mumbling between the nurses and the doctors and looking at me with sideways glances, because here was a 13-year-old who would die. So they told my parents, don't worry about her education. Let her do what she wants to do. They gave me a diagnosis that would have brought me to age 19. So I'm pretty sure that my parents had their own version of nervous breakdowns because, of course, there was no medication, there was no therapy, there was no vest, there was no pulmonary drainage, there was nothing. And so, because I was kept in a bubble, unlike kids today who work in communities and maybe they go to camps pre-COVID and there is all this wonderful social networking, and we have everything from psychologists to yoga practitioners to meditation practitioners to teen groups and mom groups and everything in between and beyond. That's community. But I was a siloed CF person. I was by myself with my family. I never saw another CF patient. I did not know they existed. I didn't know what they looked like. I just went to the doctor and went home.
Wow.
So it was a very different social structure, as in no social structure. I think in some places there certainly were CF parents and little family groups, but did I have knowledge of a population of kids like me? Absolutely not.
When did you realize, or when were you told the magnitude of that diagnosis? I mean, weren't you wondering why you were living in such a bubble at that
Well,
time?
yes and no, because my parents, my mother especially, who was a professional musician, insisted that I just keep doing all the activities I was doing before I was sick. And okay, if I had pneumonia or if I needed to go into the hospital, well, that's part of what we did. But I was never given that sort of, the march of death kind of diagnosis. Like, okay, honey, you've got 5 years, so live it up. No, we just kind of went back to normal, except for that I had a nebulizer and I breathed this stinky stuff called mucomist that was rotten egg expectorant. And but I played the clarinet and I kept up with clarinet lessons, and I played baseball and I kept on the mound, and I was a social kid, and we didn't know not to interact. We didn't know those things in those years. So it wasn't until I went to college that I learned, well, this might not go that well ultimately, because there were more and more conversations with doctors. And when I turned 19, which was supposed to be the year that I would expire, like, let her go. My parents were told I would live to be 19. At 19, I was going to school in Rome, and I took with me the most recent x-rays. I had this gigantic DeVilbiss nebulizer, which was the size of a small microwave. I took every type of electrical adapter. So if I was going to travel, I could plug it in Amsterdam, or I could plug it in Paris or whatever. And all the configurations are different in Europe for the currents. And I just kind of strapped on the knowledge, that I would need to take care of myself as best as possible. And at age 19, I was not thriving. I was a person with CF going to school in Europe, determined to see the world. And so I hauled all this junk around with me in an extra pair of jeans and a pair of pajamas And I headed out after school on late Thursday, every Thursday of at the train station in Rome that was near St. Peter's. And I'd get to my destination, maybe with a girlfriend or another buddy, and I'd boil water on a little hot plate I carried with me. And I made sterile water and I'd load it into the nebulizer and I'd plop in my mucomist and I'd do my therapy and I'd do it in the morning and then we'd load up and rent bicycles and ride through the tulip fields or whatever, going to see the Van Gogh Museum or whatever I was doing.
That's incredible. And did you realize then the importance of being active and getting around? And do you think that played a part in keeping you healthy?
I think what played a part in keeping me healthy was mental health. That I was a determined young person and teenager that aspired to see the world. And I was already calling myself an artist. And so, I was determined to go to the Louvre and I was determined to go to the Rijksmuseum or the Van Gogh Museum. Or I was determined, to do things and see things and not be. And I know it's now in the sea of nomenclature not to identify as a sick person, but I didn't have a model. I didn't have anybody who said, you have this thing, but you don't need to be a sick person. I just imagined that I didn't necessarily have to be seen as a sick person. So nobody used terms like you've got to stay active or you need to exercise. The structure was there was no structure.
Yeah. And
So
were there even enzymes then? Did
yeah,
you have them in capsules?
yeah, these big white
Okay.
things. We call them the horse pills.
Ah,
Yeah,
well, they're better now. Yeah.
yeah, they're better now.
Yeah.
There was a small battery of stuff compared with all the things that people have taken over the decades since then.
I have to tell you, I have so much that I want to hear from you and so much I want to tell you, but I wore this for you because it reminds me of like Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's
Oh
just,
yes, thank you.
Southwest.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, your story is incredible. Just who you are, a master in fine arts in painting and a PhD in art history. And art is such a huge part of my family, as I shared with you. My
yes.
mom's a sculptor, but I just love your story. And you were just talking about it. But when did you realize art? Well, I guess your mom, you were playing the clarinet. Was it always art was always a part throughout your life from the beginning?
I think that it's an organic thing. No, my mother was musical. My father was a person in industry. He worked for a Chicago-based company, large company called International Harvester, which started out as McCormick. So he was a high-level person in in that company. But for me, it was something more intuitive and deep. It wasn't like oh, I want to be a pianist like my mom. I had this strange. I now think of it as a kind of pathology, a kind of psychological pathology. I thought that if you could surround yourself with beauty, and this went so far as to very early on insisting that my bedspread matched my curtains and that the paint in my room matched the particular color of the blossom of lilac on my bedspread, and it had to be that way. And I couldn't have a yellow phone. I had to have a green phone because it matched the foliage. But there was this whole notion, this urge that beauty equaled betterment. And that if my surroundings were better and if what I was looking at was better than average, then I could be better, even as a person who had a serious pulmonary problem. So it was all configured in my own imagination and will that to be around beauty, to make beauty, to be involved in beauty, to live with beauty is probably a better idea than all the vicissitudes of what suffering looks like. It was a kind of self-remedy, I suppose. And I wouldn't know to even say that until this age that I'm at now, or 10 years ago, to have that kind of reflection upon it. But it was an urge.
It's wonderful. And describe your art. Describe how and what you paint and what moves you in.
Oh, Well, I mean, it's quite varied. When I was a painter, because I don't paint any longer, I morphed into a writer about art. But when I was a mature enough painter to receive honors, and even I had museum exhibitions when I was a very young person. I always, seemingly worked with issues about the body, even though I wasn't a representational painter. I think that I was referring to my own suffering through the medium of paint and the application of paint. And I have to say that it manifested in divergent ways, but there was always a reference to self without knowing to call myself a person with an affliction. And I know that there is now, a wonderful group of artists with disabilities who make, and the language of their making comes out in various forms. And for me, it was early, it was like the late 60s into the 70s. I had an MFA in painting in 82, but I never thought of myself as a feminist, therefore referring to the body, which is the premise of vanguard feminist work. But I was just telling my own story. If no one other than myself, perhaps, even if there'd never been a museum exhibition or shows or awards, or, like I was chosen by the Dallas Museum of Art as the outstanding, most promising young painter one year in Dallas. And, I had these accolades. There was never a subject like a landscape or still life or the portrait, you know.
Hmm.
There were always abstract things, but or non-objective things, I would say.
And you've done so many things
I have.
from the painting, and now you're at writing. Kind of take us through that journey. I think it's really important and interesting not to, we don't want to just talk about CF. We want to talk about your
Yeah.
whole journey and who you are, because you are interesting and inspirational in many, many different ways. So kind of take us
Yeah.
through that journey.
I think that underlying it all is the creative urge. Whether it was, the creative urge to make my perfect bedroom as a girl, or the creative urge to start painting. And I was good enough as a painter that my parents invested in private art lessons. And I think that those, the way that I wanted to express whatever was on my mind was not only real, it was also theoretical. And I had what I believed was a high aesthetic attunement. And what that then leads to is creative inquiry, because I think that creative imagination can, for the entire CF population, beg the question: I am unique. What is my story? How might I formulate it? Is it worth telling? In what ways is my story unique, or my point of view unique? And maybe that's expressed by, I only want to work in blue. I only want to learn how to play jazz guitar. I only want to tap dance. I only want to write, poetry about X, Y, and Z. I only want to look at my family genealogy. I think that the creative impulse for people that have chronic illness, and perhaps we can call them life sentences, which is really, it's kind of a leg up to say, oh, this is what I have, instead of in X year I'm going to be hit by a bus. We're given the tools to figure out how to manage the heavy suitcase that CF is. You haul this thing around with you your whole life. But in my case, the creative urge as a maker of art, into a person who then went into the art business in New York City for some years, and then morphed into a scholar of art, modernism. I'm a Picasso scholar. It was all kind of the same urge. It was just a huge inquiry that might be summed up with the question: how do I think about this? How do I think about this urge to make a painting? And how do I go about this? How do I think about this urge to know more about the history of art and modernism? And how is that entangled, perhaps, with my own understanding of myself and my own mind? I think that's sort of the bedrock of all these phases that I've taken on to either understand or master. I like the idea of going so far to say that, well, I mastered that. I mastered that dance step, or I mastered that riff on the flute, or, I mastered this period in Picasso's long career as a painter. I think that the creative urge, and I've said this before, I think to be creative is a very important thing for people with CF and families who have children or teenagers supporting young adults with CF to consider. How can this child, be urged to be a creative person? Creative people, scientists are creative people. It can be anything.
Right.
But don't just, I would say to anybody, don't just buy the whole story that you're a sick person and you can't make. To make is a very powerful thing, to make. Yeah.
Right.
And therefore, and in the making, I think we remake ourselves.
So profound. I just love hearing you because you speak to me and to so many other people. I think of my daughters who both have CF and are very creative, and one's in London, like doing her own thing and just working with all these different artists and all these different mediums, and she's glass blowing now and just living her. Yeah, it's very cool. And not letting the disease define her. And then my other daughter, Emily, is in New York, or not New York, I'm sorry, Chicago. And she's, thinking, oh, I might take a, clay throwing class. And, it's just incredible because they can kind of work through whatever is going on and express themselves. It is a beautiful thing. And, and I want to hear about Picasso because you were a scholar. I love Picasso. You know who I also love? I love his daughter, Paloma Picasso. I actually have her jewelry.
I do too.
Oh my gosh, I have this. Actually, I never take this off. It's so small you can't even see it, but it's a little pearl with the olive, branches, leaves, whatever. But yeah, her stuff is so beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah,
it is
beautiful. Yeah. I think for anybody who's listening now or might listen in the future, who does have CF or is bringing up a child who has CF, or it's a teenager who's rebelling against having CF and doesn't want to do routine and stuff. Always, always urge these people in our beloved community to figure out what to make, because people. I know a lot of people in a lot of places. They don't think of me as being a people with CF. They know I'm a person with CF, but they think of me as X, Y, and Z first. And then the closest friends check in and go, how are you doing? Or how was that last, hospitalization? Or how was the da-da-da? And the people that know me and know that I've gone through transplant, check in on my anniversary, April 4th. And so that's a component of who I am, but it's just, it's like, okay, you slice the pie and here's a bigger piece and here's a smaller piece, and it's all the pie. So I'm completely convinced that the creative life should be a healthy component of life with CF and the challenges with CF.
I agree. And I do want to talk about your transplant anniversary, but first I did want to ask you, what did you love the most, or what did you find most interesting about Picasso?
When you're an art historian, you covered the ages, so I did work in early Greek and I did work in medieval manuscripts, and I studied with a Renaissance scholar, so I've written on Michelangelo, and and so you do this work when at the doctoral level. But I was fortunate. I was in New York City, and it was the first Gulf War, and I had this marvelous apartment down near Chinatown, and I was watching the NBC reporter crawling on the carpet through Hotel Baghdad while it was being bombed. And I thought, things are going to go badly for a long time, and probably I should not live in New York City, and probably I should decide to do something else. And I was working as a high-end art dealer at the time. And I thought, if the economy stops, nobody's going to want to buy a Mark Rothko painting. This is going to go badly. And I had been itching to go back to school and to turn my attention towards scholarship. And so I uh, went to Virginia, and I got into the graduate program, the MA program in Virginia, and I met a woman who was the definitive international scholar of Picasso in the 1930s. So I was accepted into the program somehow because I wasn't an art history person. I was already older. I was in my early 40s. There was all these, brilliant, smart 20-year-olds entering the program, and they took 7 people out of the 150. And
Wow.
I made the cut because I had written some sort of paper that impressed the people who were accepting the graduate students. And so I was in all of a sudden. And that meant to scramble to study German intensely and to bone up on French intensely and to refamiliarize with Spanish because, you read Picasso in 4 languages. And it was Lydia Gassman who took me in as her student. And because she was a renowned Picasso scholar, that's what you did. Well, you do other things beside. And over time, I honed in on what it was about the myriad campaigns, and we say series of works or kinds of works or modes of style. You go from cubism to figuration and to surrealism to paper collage to bronze sculptures. But I honed in on the renowned and certainly widely recognized, internationally recognized for decades, most important work, which is Guernica from 1937. And this is a painting that has an electric sun in the very top section of this picture, which is about mural size. It's 37 feet wide, 38 feet wide. And what is this sun beaming down on? It's beaming down on a crying woman in a house. It's beaming down on a horse that has a spear through its neck. It's beaming down on a triumphant bull. It's beaming down on a baby and a village that's burning. And so, I studied the literature. I read everything about the painting for years and years and years. And I think it was the problem of the sun that was turned into an electric motif. That this is an electrified sun. And what does that say about the threat of civilization within an atmosphere that is no longer natural? That when the sun becomes electrified, when the sun is dependent upon a power grid or upon other nuances of authority, then what does that say? And so my dissertation was a 438-page thing that really did unwind this motif of electric light in modernism and in Picasso especially. And Picasso himself wrote about electricity, and he wrote about the dark sun, and he wrote about the black sun. And so I became, just kind of like Alice in Wonderland. I was just down in the hole, and I was in the hole, and I was having tea parties, and I was seeing gigantic, scary things, and I was trying to understand that whole magical realism, in a sense, and understand the mind of this artist who was by then quite famous in 37, in the 30s. And there are deeply spiritual implications in the black and whiteness of it, from his Spanish upbringing as a Catholic. And so, the thing got a hold of me for about 10 years. Yeah.
Wow.
I got really sick in the midst of it. And then I became museum director twice, so I had to shelve it because I was running museums, building museums. And after the transplant, I went back to it, not sure that I had the mind for it, not only from the trauma of transplant, but from drugs. And also I'd been away from it. It's like I had to refresh my creative mind. And so somewhat after transplant, 3 years, I completed it and then, achieved the status of the PhD. So that was a whole other kind of big journey amidst surviving with CF and then doing better because I had new lungs.
Yeah, so incredible. The whole story, just everything intertwining with cystic fibrosis and your
Yeah.
art and passion and journey and how that goes. And as we are weaving back and forth in between CF and because it all is connected, how did you feel? You've lived all over the world and
Mhm.
you've been to many CF clinics. Do
Mhm.
you find consistency and are you constantly meeting new people that give you a different perspective about CF as I know you're giving others, wonderful perspectives?
Well, I have. When I was a New Yorker in the 80s, I went to a hospital that's now defunct, but it was called St. Vincent's Hospital. And it was just off the avenue in Greenwich Village. And it was really the center for AIDS research. And it was the only hospital in New York, therefore the United States, that was addressing the AIDS epidemic. Well, the CF clinic there was run by a doctor who had been the understudy of Dr. Dorothy Anderson, who found the CF gene. And so my doctor was a marvelous woman, and but we didn't have an adult wing. I would go to CF Pediatric in St. Vincent's, and she had an assistant doctor, Jack Jacoby, who, along with two siblings, had CF. And Jack had a very, very hard case of CF, and yet he kept up his medical practice seeing CF kids. Well, I learned a lot from those people because they were just, never lie down, never let this get you. We're gonna fix this up. This was a time when, the IVs were administered through needles that were like 2.5-inch long stainless steel needles threaded into the arm. The arm was then taped to a 1x2 wooden board. And so you'd be in bed with a wooden board to your side. So that meant like, turning over, you're flipping over with this plank on top of you. And
Literally. Wow.
literally a plank. And there, of course, was no vest, and PT was very, very difficult. And the expansion of possibilities, even though we didn't really have any good drugs and we didn't, the equipment was pretty barbaric. I think it was the spirit of those New York CF people was tremendous for me, and it was implanted in me. Um, I had a therapist who also would see me at her house. So I worked at a gallery, Midtown Manhattan, 57th and 5th Avenue. And after work, I'd zip across the avenues by foot to arrive at Sue's apartment, which was catty corner to Bloomingdale's. And I'd walk up her 3 flights, not even an elevator, huffing and puffing. She'd have the drainage board on her kitchen table. It would be slanted. I'd hop on top of there. We'd get going. And then across the street, because it's rush hour, here's like beep, 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 like 1,000 taxis streamed by Bloomingdale's. And Sue's clapping on me, and I'm coughing, and we take a breather. And then Sue claps on me. And it's just this consciousness of life whirling around you. And yet you're doing your life as a CF person in the midst of all this other stuff. And I think that's another thing New York gave me, the CF care in New York gave me, was this sense of being part of the world, even though I had my own bubble. And so I was cared for at university clinics in Charlottesville. I was cared for great clinics in the UK. I married in Scotland, my husband Daniel, and I was very well taken care of. They had a whole different approach there that was beneficial for me. And I was never part of communities. It was more like what's happening in the clinics with the doctors. And it wasn't until transplant that I felt to be part of a CF community, because that's when I started meeting other people. But, I was never a person who was even invited to participate. It's a funny thing. And I wonder if it's a little bit like kids growing up in COVID and they're just home being homeschooled and they're on their tablets, and you're kind of siloed in a
Right.
way.
It is very interesting, even today, because sometimes CFRI has a beautiful event where people with
Yes.
CF can knowingly get together. But
Yes.
my daughters were raised, by their clinic and us. Don't be near anyone else with
No.
CF. They wouldn't think of going to a gathering with
No.
anyone other than their siblings having
No.
CF.
No.
As a matter of fact, their doctor used to say, open the windows when you drive with your kids.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
it is, 2 degrees. We're not
Yeah.
opening windows here in Michigan, but like,
Yeah.
it's very, very interesting. So your husband, Daniel Reeve,
Yes. Yes.
Emmy Award winning film
Yes.
director. I read a little bit about him,
Yes.
and he is best known for his calligraphy in Lord of the Rings. So many other movies I have discovered. You're both artists. Tell us a little bit about your love story. And then,
Oh, well,
and
that's a
when
good
he
one.
found out you had CF and
Right off the
whether,
bat. Yeah. I mean, he's an American, but he had lived in Scotland 21 years and first went there on a Guggenheim as a young filmmaker. And so he was at Virginia when I was in the doctoral program in Charlottesville. And he was invited over to be featured at the Virginia Festival of Film, which is in that region is a big deal. And we were given the same faculty office. I had gone on faculty, he was visiting artist, and so we were given and I didn't see him I had seen him across the parking lot. And this is the South, most of the professors and guys there, they all wore these, like hickey, dungaree, beige pants and plaid shirts. Well, here was this guy in the parking lot who had snipped short gray hair and a Italian suit, and he was wearing Birkenstocks. And I was like, well, man, this guy must be from Switzerland. Who is this guy? He does not look like an American person. Anyway, as it turned out, we were given the same office and had dinner. And wow, we had this really, really fast love story. More on his side than mine. I was very nervous about teaching and getting on with the dissertation, and he was already he's older than I am, a mature, well known filmmaker. So I think that I fell sick about our third date. I was in the UVA hospital. He came to see me. He was doing big projects there on campus. He told the regents that he was canceling because his girlfriend was sick, and they're like, you can't cancel. And he's like, So he had become convinced I was, he was, now it seems the love of his life, but, I guess I'm going to believe him. Yeah. At this point, we'll be married 25 years. I
nice.
know. And so within a very short amount of time, he had this dream that he was kneeling by my graveside sometime in the future, that he knew through this dream that I was meant to be with him because he was going to take care of me. And I don't know, we'd known each other maybe a couple of months, and he asked me to marry him. And I was absolutely like, what? So I said, well, I'm just really going to have to think about this, a bit. And I did, but I said yes. And then he was a full-time resident of Scotland and had left the United States in the 80s. So I moved with him to Scotland, and we had a Scottish life, and that was quite wonderful. Very, very, very marvelous. And I became a patient both in Edinburgh and at Glasgow at the Royal Hospitals. And we have a farm in France, so we moved to France for a while. And then I didn't feel that I could be okay staying in France because the weather was more severe and we weren't in a city. And so that's when we decided to move back, which was in 2005. We've been back 20 years, I guess. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're having this most beautiful life. Do
Yeah.
you feel it and look back on it both with the CF and your career and marriage as this most beautiful life? I mean,
I take it with me because I understand food to a degree because of France, and I understand courtesies and manners in a different way. I understand traditions and history and the lived cultures of places and how important those things are, not from a conservative point of view, but from a point of view of appreciation. And they're always with me. I find it harder to be American now than ever before. And so I think we go about things a bit more differently. And I know that it was a very charmed time, to live in one of the most beautiful regions, in the Bordeaux region of Southwest France, and to go to market days and to know, the 40 kinds of cheese out of the 500 kinds of cheeses, or, to garden. And we also had spiritual practice with the Buddhist Vietnam teacher called Thich Nhat Hanh, who was our neighbor. And so that place is called Plum Village. So we would often, go there and be part of that community, or just to jump on the train and run to Paris for a weekend. I mean, I know that it was very, it was very a charmed time. And as I get older and have less flexibility for adventure in that way, I realize I probably won't repeat that kind of lifestyle again. But I wouldn't call myself an adventure seeker, but I do like the idea of expanding what you think are your boundaries. I think boundaries are self-imposed, and I think boundaries can be more self-imposed by those of us with CF, because you think, oh, I can't do this, or there might be too many people there. Yes, cautions, always cautions. But why not? I mean, your daughters are doing that. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I have been very fortunate that way. Or to be a New Yorker. I mean, a solid New Yorker, not just somebody who went there and, ate in Chinatown, but a tax-paying New Yorker. Or to go back to school and learn the ways of the Old South in Virginia, which is such a marvelous place. So I am a Texan, so I understand that. And then transplant life, and we became San Franciscans for 7 years during that ordeal, and New Mexico. So it's a crazy quilt. It's a
Yeah,
crazy quilt.
it is.
Gingham and calico and polka dots. It's made up of crazy patterns. Yeah.
Wow. You said you're writing. Have you written books? I mean, I would think that I know I would love to read more about you. And have you put that down on paper yet? What are you
Well,
doing in regard to writing?
oh, well, it's twofold. I have written scholarly books. I've been published by Yale and by the University of New Mexico, and beginning to negotiate with University of Texas Press about a book that I'm working on now. These are all art subjects. But I have also been chipping away at a monograph about my life as a CF person. And it's not typical of I guess, the marvelous books. I remember in New Mexico, we had this gal who wrote the book, Sick Girl. I forget her name. A marvelous person. Sick Girl Speaks. That was it. And she was an inspirational young speaker. Unfortunately, I think she's passed with CF. But my book has a working title called Pneuma, Pneuma, which is a double word for both breath and soul from the Greek. First meaning soul, then adapted a bit later to mean breath. And I posit my story within the lineage of my mother's family, because she had one sister who died of what I'm sure was CF on her 20th birthday in 1935, coughing to death and cadaveric. And so I've looked into that history. I've been reading about health records and death records and the environment of the little place that they lived in rural southwest Missouri near Springfield in the Ozarks, and the church and the family and Catherine's boyfriend who came to sit beside the barn, and my grandpa, who we called Pappy, went outdoors and told him, son, it's not a good day and you should never come back. And he was there with a birthday present in hand, which Catherine never received. And my grandparents, who were simple country folk, had bought her a bicycle thinking that that might help raise her from the bed. And she had requested a bike. And my aunt, who I'm named for, whose name was Anne, had sent money. And Catherine, I have a copy of Catherine's letter, and it says, "Thank you for the horn and little basket. It's going." And so, I worked up this whole story about Catherine and the bike never being ridden and being parked in the sunshine on the side of the barn and so forth. So I'm, there's a split brain. There's my scholarship brain, and then there's this other brain, which is my story brain, my lived brain, my lived body, which my husband says, "Oh, forget all that. Somebody else can write about Picasso. I mean, you should write this book. You should write Numa. You should do that." So I've sketched it out, and chapters are named after places I've lived or where my family started. So the first one's Springfield, the next one's Dallas. There's one called New York City, and. So that's something I'm writing.
I love that, and I agree with your husband. When I can't wait to read it. So yeah, and we'll have you back on to talk about it when you're ready.
Okay. And then, but I part of the creative life is I just now entered into a legal agreement to establish a foundation. And so I'm at work on that. And one of the issues is food and housing insecurity for families and people with CF. And so it doesn't have the scope of your wonderful family foundation, but it's something I feel that I want to commit. I'm going to be 70 in August. So do I get to be 75? Do I get to be 80? Do I get to be 72? So I'm at work on things that are beyond myself, but that which my body has experienced. I haven't experienced food insecurity or housing insecurity, but I have been around those that suffer from this inequity.
And I think it's so smart. And I will promote it to the end of the earth when you get that foundation going, because I have to say, we offer financial assistance for medical things. And I can't tell you how many requests we get. Can you help us with our mortgage? Can you help us with our rent? Can you help us with our car, our utilities, groceries? I mean, it's all those things. You are right.
Gasoline don't live near our clinic.
There is a
$50 to put, should it? So I was really, struck by, really life in San Francisco and Palo Alto, which is like the 1%ers, right? And so you go to clinic, and people are in mobile homes, because even these strip motels that they've turned into swanky little strip motels are $4.75 a night, and your person is sick, and Ronald McDonald House is full, or what do people do? So where does the rubber hit the road that's beyond the billions that are spent on research and that are going into all of these, very important think tanks, or, places like Genentech that gave us DNase, first of all. It was such a breakthrough drug many years ago. All of that seems to be on the forefront. But when you're living the thing, and your kids live in the thing, or your 19-year-old is living the thing, or you're 27 and you're living the thing, and you're trying to be independent, and you can't quite cut your rent, and you can't go to work every day because you're sick or whatever, where does the rubber hit the road, and how do we formulate help for those people? So it's embryonic for me now, but as of yesterday, I signed the legal documents and
Yay.
put personal money forward in order to establish the foundation, which will be known as the McKinnon Friedman Foundation. And so it's forthcoming. It's forthcoming.
That is wonderful, because, as you know, programs are cut. Nonprofits are the answer, because we're the help.
Nonprofits.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, we are all helping everybody, and we don't have to go sideways into this, but all the federal cuts, and I just want people to understand, all those people that are losing their jobs, they're losing their health insurance, or they can't afford it. So if they have a child with some rare disease or CF, I mean, it's all trickling down. So we're just going to
all trickling down into
be in this really
It's hard.
hard place.
Or you think about, okay, well, what's going to happen to energy bills? Because if, X, Y, and Z are cut out, then your child who is 8 and is really struggling, and you live in Alabama and it's 112 outside, you've got to keep the air conditioner on. And your bill becomes $470 a month because you've got to keep the air conditioner on. I mean, all of these things have to be taken within a holistic point of view of, what is it that I have in my, tiny little pot of gold that might be able to help others. So mine's a mom and pop shop foundation. I don't have partners or corporations or anything behind me. It's just that I have things that are fungible, and I'm gonna transfer that in and try to fund this thing. So
Well, that's incredible. And we'll put you on our resource page and we'll promote it. And for anybody who's out on a walk listening to us, I think they just extended their walk. I think they're going to keep walking until this podcast is done because everything you're saying is so interesting. And I do have a couple more things I wanted to ask you.
of
First of,
course,
do you feel you're a feminist now? Would you call yourself a feminist?
I'm an
Does it
individualist.
kind
I'm an individualist. Yeah. And I encompass the feminine, of course, but I don't have a radical bone to pick, except that I think everybody of gender choice, race, religion must be treated fairly. Must be treated fairly. So I think that uh, if I have a feminist voice, it's just that I've always stood up for myself. I like what Rebecca Solnit identified as mansplaining because I even still get that, and I get very irritated, like, some man telling me something that I know better. And in that way, I feel yeah, I'm a feminist in that way. But I also think that it's the individual's right to speak up for themselves. So I think, I think of myself as just, an individual happens to be born a certain gender. So
You're an advocate. I mean,
I'm
I
an
think
advocate.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah. And
describe.
I have a big mouth, I'll just say, well, I don't agree with that. Or, from my experience, this is what I believe, this is what I've endured, or is what I've enjoyed, or this is what I've loved, or you got to check this thing out, or that's I don't believe that's correct thinking. I think there's a deep morality in just expressing who you are. I think there's a deep right for your own, moral stance to just be who you are, And so in that way, I advocate for the individual.
And
Yeah.
because you speak up, maybe others who sometimes can't, or you say something that speaks to them literally
Mhm.
and, and helps them.
Mhm.
We've talked about kind of where you're going professionally in the future. What are you looking forward to in regards to cystic fibrosis, in regard to your lungiversary anniversary
Yes.
in April, and
Yeah.
kind of the direction of CF?
Well, my goodness, I've said to some parents that I've met at conferences or even in the halls at Stanford, made friends just kind of hanging around, waiting for clinic to begin or wait to be seen. And you go, oh, hey, what's your story? Sounds quite quirky and also somewhat irreverent. I said, it's never been a better time to have CF. There's never been a better time. It's not 1935. It's not 1888 when, it's not 1955 when I was born. It's 1972. We've come all this way through this pharmacological advances and the money that's been poured in to find a cure, which has to be on the horizon. And we'll look back on this, like hopefully we look back on polio and we say, wow, that was a historical fact in the body collective of cystic fibrosis. Now, there's the issue of those suffering in lesser societal and cultural circumstances that have no aid or assistance or proper doctors or even diagnoses. And so in this country, where we are so blessed with an economy and a health system to date, I think it is quite possible that this will be the place that one day runs the flag up the pole and says that flag is going to say CF cured with a D on the end. CF cured in the past tense, no longer. But does that then infiltrate into the international community? And so I have a large place in my heart. There's an organization that I'm friends with in Dallas called CF Vest for Life. And they've been sending vests to Pakistan and they get them out to the rural areas, these people. That it's like some dad will send a really poor video of his 5-year-old with a vest that's been managed through Dallas, sent to JFK. Somebody's on the receiving end in London. They get it into Mumbai. Somebody knows how to get it on the back of a bicycle and it goes to the village. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah. Rod Scattinger does.
He's
Vest. Yeah. He is fantastic. CF Vest Worldwide, I think he's called it now. But yeah, he is incredible. And I don't know if you know, but I've traveled to Egypt and I'm going again to meet CF patients there. And
that is so huge.
And it's like going back in time. It's going back to the 1950s. And it's beautiful to see now that things are getting better. But
yes,
you are such an inspiration, and I want to hear more, from you. And I hope that I meet you in person.
Yes, of course. Why not?
Soon. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yes. I think that I should have been called on to be an advocate. But everything in due course, and everything comes at the time it's supposed to come, I suppose. I mean, lungs come to people on wait lists, waiting. Oh, boom, they're there. Okay. It's a mystery that's outside of our power. And so perhaps my advocacy was only meant for this time and not when I was 42 or not when I was 28 or, so I'm kind of like Pigpen in Peanuts. I have this blanket just full of stuff that I drag along with me, and so I'm eager and willing. And I had a really nice experience doing the keynote at the CFRI Education Conference last year, which was their 37th annual. That was a wonderful experience, We met folks I wouldn't know.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's great.
Well, before we wrap it up, though, I do want to find out, do you do something special for your, lung anniversaries? What do you do?
Oh, well, there has been until now. I'm becoming somewhat political because I do believe that human rights are at risk now. So I had been on Facebook, but I decided to come off of Facebook because I felt that every click or every like was going into a person's pocket who had aligned himself with concepts and beliefs and actions that I am wholly against. So in that way, there were like 400, happy rebirthday cards coming out and cartoons, and people would make memes with me and, all sorts of stuff. But we always have a celebration, whether it's just a small dinner party or like a meditation prayer in the morning for gratitude. I had written to my donor's family who they couldn't find lungs to match, couldn't find. I was under the care of Dr. Weil. I waited 9 months. I dropped to 83 pounds. I was so cadaveric that I was in a wheelchair, of course, on oxygen, just waiting. And the call came for surgery. I went through it. And as we all do who've endured that, you can't even really know where you've been and what you've really come back to. Like where did I just go? But I came back with components now in my body that had belonged to someone else that they were born with. And I said right off the bat, they're allowing me to speak, but I wonder what color did they love? What food what language did they speak? All these things about my person. And so because they kept expanding the field to find the organs, we don't know exactly what the catchment was from, catchment area was at, I should say more specifically. But after I went through this ordeal, which it is an ordeal, I came out the other side and I really wanted to express my gratitude for everything, for the ability to even sit at the computer and write a letter. I sent many, many, many Christmas cards, Easter cards, letters. They were translated into Spanish. I later learned. The family disappeared. Social services lost the bead on them. It was theorized they may have been migrant workers. So I have often said, extend the compassion from your heart. You do not know who your brother and sister in life may be. An absolute stranger's body left this planet. They did not stay. I remained. It cannot be explained why. We can only understand it through the umbrella of grace and science. And so every year Daniel and I bring that occasion into focus, into our abiding hearts with ineffable. We can't even really speak about it, but just a knowing gratitude that a miracle had happened. It was engineered by doctors, but it was larger than that. So we have a quiet thing, and then we have a dinner party with beloved friends or old people on the team, or we always do something. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's such a beautiful thing. And that's why I can't wait to read everything that you're writing, because it's so interesting. And I do have one last question. When is your birthday in August? Because I was born in August.
8/11.
Oh, okay. I'm the 25th. So we're close. But
yeah. And my husband Daniel is 8/1, and he said, "Oh no, two cats in the same room." Well, I know that I'm the cat that's missing part of its tail and got its eye scratched in the fight, and you are the cat on the velvet pillow on the couch that gets groomed twice a day. I'm like, oh man, I don't think that's me, but okay.
But you're going with it. I love it.
I'm going on a couple of cats.
I thank you for sharing just some of your stories. I appreciate it. It was great to talk to you.
Laura, thanks for all you're doing there. Your foundation is just fantastic. It's just, your website is so gorgeous and so inspiring and democratic. It's like, oh, well, I could do that, or I could understand this. It's just a beautiful thing you've made.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yes.
So, well, thanks. And we'll talk again for sure.
Love it. Yeah, love it. Thanks for the honor today.
Thank you.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical, The Science of Possibility, and Viatris. It was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.